Hello, I'm Dean Ray Johnson, and this is a board game textbook, How to Play Video for Star Trek Captain's Chair, a game by David Turksey and Nigel Buckle, published by WizKids. In Captain's Chair, the players are cadets at Starfleet Academy, and your next class assignment is to take on a simulation that has multiple issues happening at the same time. You're dealing with diplomacy with neutral planets, logistics with supplies and staffing, and Cold War across the neutral zone. The simulation says, we're going to give you the ships and crew of a famous starship captain. Let's see if you can do any better than they did. Captain's Chair is a game for 1 to 2 players where players compete to earn the best grade in the simulation, and by best grade, I mean victory points, which looks like this badge icon. Captain's Chair is a deck building game. You choose a captain and crew, like Captain Picard and the USS Enterprise, or Captain Sela and the Romulan fleet. Each captain comes with a starting deck of cards. You add more cards to your deck as you play, and the new cards give you new actions and score victory points. You start your turn with a hand of 5 cards from your deck. All of the actions in this game come from the operations on your cards. Like, this ship card has 2 play operations. So when you play this card from your hand, you resolve one of these 2 operations. Usually you play a card for an operation and then you discard the card at the end of your turn. Both of these operations say deploy this ship. That makes the ship card stay on the table between turns. While the ship is deployed, you resolve its resupply operation at the start of each of your turns, which provides more cards or resources. And during your turn, you can use one of the ship's activation operations. Like this says, spend 1 crystal to warp this ship, to send the ship to a location. There's lots of different cards as you play. There's a market area of cards that you can take from. Like, you may have an action card in hand that says spend 2 cards to gain a cargo card from the market. As captain, you'll need to focus on finding cards that score points and complete other goals. And by other goals, I mostly mean missions and development cards. First, each captain's board has a mission on it. Like, Captain Cisco's board has a mission to have 4 ship cards on the table and to advance 7 spaces on the yellow or the red track on his board. When he does that, the reward says he can get a development cost a development card at a reduced cost. Each captain comes with a stack of development cards. These cards have strong operations or score lots of victory points. These cards start the game in your reserve, and every so often you can pay a development card's cost to add it to your deck. So early in the game, you're especially looking for cards that complete your missions or pay for developments from your specific captain. You trigger the end of the game when one of 2 special decks are empty. First, there's a special resource called Glory that you gain from different rewards, and there's a stack of cards called the Stardate cards that have Glory tokens stacked on top of them. When you gain Glory, you take it off of the current Stardate card. When this card is empty, you stack Glory tokens on the next card in the Stardate stack. And when there's only 1 Stardate card left, you take all of the tokens off that card, and then that triggers the end of the game. So basically, you trigger the end of the game after the players gain a certain number of Glory tokens. Then you play to the end of the second player's turn, you take 1 more turn, and whoever scores the most victory points wins. But there's also a deck of incident cards, which are all negative effects. Sometimes you play a card that makes you gain an incident card as part of the cost, or sometimes you play an attack card that forces your opponent to draw incident cards. If the stack of incident cards is ever empty, then the game ends immediately, and the player with the fewest incident cards wins, since they were the least to blame for causing a disaster. So I'll start with setup. I won't teach any rules during setup. To skip setup, check the video timeline and go to the next chapter. To start the 2-player game, there's going to be a row of location cards between the 2 players. The location cards either say starting location or advanced location on the bottom. You need to choose 4 of the starting location cards at random. The other starting locations go back in the box. You place 3 of the starting locations as the face-up card row. Then you shuffle all of the advanced locations, and you put a 4th starting location on top of that, and that's the location deck. Then there's 6 other types of cards here. You shuffle each card type into its own deck. The backs of these cards are all the same. You need to see the tags on the card's top left. So all of the cards with this purple tag get shuffled into the ally deck. The person, cargo, ship, and ally decks make up the market. You place the market strip below these decks, and then you flip one card face up from each deck. There's a red space on the market strip here. You place the incident deck here. The other side says junk. This is like the discard pile for the market. There's a sixth deck of encounter cards that goes above the market. And then you can also make a supply here of the yellow, pink, and blue tokens and the ship standee tokens. Last here, there's a set of Stardate cards. You find all of the Stardate cards that say 2-player on them on the top. You stack them in number order with the number 1 card on top and the highest card on the bottom, and then you place glory tokens on the top card. This top card says 5 glory, so you stack 5 glory tokens here. And that is all of the main table setup. Now for each player, you choose one of the captains. Your captain card goes on the table. Each captain has a matching crew board. The basic side of this board has 1 mission on it. The flip side, the advanced side, has 3 missions on it. You choose which side is face up. You don't need to play the same side as the other player. Each captain also has a set of matching cards. You see the captain's face on the bottom of each of their cards. This card says 1 Cis 24 of 25, so Cisco has 25 associated cards. Then each card's bottom tag tells you where to put the card at the start of the game. This card is available. You shuffle your available cards face down, and that's your starting deck. Some other cards say reserve or development on the bottom. This is like your personal market pile. You gain these cards later. You stack all of the development cards face up. You shuffle the reserve cards face down and stack those on top of the development cards. If a card says controlled location or deployed, these cards start face up in play. I think every deck at least starts with 1 deployed ship card in play. And then a few other cards start in uncommon locations. If the card says discard on the bottom, then it starts face up in a discard pile off to the side. If it says incident deck, then you shuffle it into the incident deck beside the market. The Captain Burnham deck has a status card. It starts in play with your captain card and adds some extra rules. After all the cards, you start with some tokens. Each player starts with 1 each of a yellow, pink, and blue resource token from the supply. Don't take the blue glory token off the Stardate card. Get it from the supply. You also get 3 trapezoid action tokens. You get 1 mission token for each mission on your crew board. You place a colored cube on each 0 space of the tracks on your crew board. Your captain has a small number on the top left for away teams. You place that many away team tokens on the captain. And you can give each player a player aid card. And then you choose a random player to take the first player token and take the first turn of the game. Finally, each player draws 5 cards from their draw deck, and that's your starting hand for the game. I'll mention a few rules for the solo game. You can skip to the next chapter if you're not playing the solo game. For the solo game, you choose whether to play against an automated bot player. If you don't want a bot opponent, then you look for the Stardate cards that say Cadet Training on top. You stack these cards in number order, you place glory tokens on top like it shows, standard for building a Stardate deck with this specific deck of cards. In Cadet Training, you're just playing to see how many points you can score. It says it's like 70, 100, or 120 points for the bronze, silver, or gold level scores. And you can read page 28 of the main rulebook for a few rules that change during the game. For a bot opponent, you choose a stack of Stardate cards that say solo versus bot. Like solo versus Ensign bot is the easiest level of the bot. You build that stack of Stardate cards as normal, and you choose a captain and set up the bot player as if it was a second player on the table. Then you read the rules in the separate rulebook that's just for the solo game. It explains a few things that you set up differently. You will need these solo cards and these bot command cards. That is all I'm going to say about the solo game in this video. The solo play rulebook explains how you use the automated command cards to choose actions for the bot player. There's a bunch of decisions for how the bot chooses which cards to gain and when to play them. There's also rules for a solo campaign mode where you make changes to your deck that persist across multiple games, and you try to win a certain number of games. If you're only going to play this game as a solo game, then I recommend that you play Cadet Training first and make sure that you understand all of the rules, because there are a lot of extra decisions to look through with the bot player. So, at the start of the game, most players start the game with their captain and their first ship card in play and a hand of 5 cards. For the first lesson, let's look at the operations, the individual abilities on cards. Almost everything you do in this game comes from the operations. There's 4 different colors of operations, which have to do with playing cards from your hand, resolving abilities once a turn, or resolving abilities during specific parts of the turn. Most of the cards that you can put in your deck have a play operation. To play a card from your hand, you resolve one of the play operations on the card. Like to play this action card from hand, you either discard some other cards from your hand to move some tokens to a location, or you draw a card, then discard a card, and then move up to 2 of your ships to a location. So, how many cards can you play on your turn? That's kind of a trick question. There's actually no limit on playing cards, but there is a limit on taking actions. You get 3 action tokens on each of your turns. When you use an action, you place one of your action tokens on that operation. This play operation has an action icon up front, so when you play this card, you can either spend an action token to resolve this play operation, or you spend no action tokens to resolve this play operation, because it doesn't have the icon. So, on your turn, you can use 3 operations that cost an action, and any number of operations that don't cost an action. Usually when you play a card, you discard it at end of turn, but some cards are, quote, on the table. And a card must be on the table to use its blue operations. For example, if you're playing as Captain Picard, you start with the Enterprise ship on the table. The play operation on this card says, spend an action token, play this card from hand, and deploy this ship. So if the Enterprise leaves the table and ends up back in your deck, you can spend an action to play it, and it deploys to the table instead of getting discarded. The Enterprise has 3 activation operations, which you can only use when it's deployed, and you can only use 1 activation per turn. Like, the first blue operation says you can spend 1 dilithium crystal to warp the ship, which moves it to a location card. When you do that, you exhaust the card. You turn the ship 90 degrees. When a card is exhausted, you can't use any of its activation abilities. But then at the end of the turn, you refresh all of your cards. You turn them all back face up. Another card type is locations. Locations don't usually go in your deck. There's a row of neutral locations between the players. When you take control of a location, you place it on the table in front of you. This location has a control operation instead of a play operation. So you do all of this stuff when you gain control of the location. And when you control the location, then you can use its blue activation abilities. Like, you can exhaust Risa, you can turn it 90 degrees, to beam a person here, which means to tuck a person card from your hand under the location. A lot of missions and other effects require you to beam certain cards onto other cards. I'll describe that more later. And all of your cards refresh at the end of your turn. The last card type that usually has blue abilities are person cards, like Will Riker here, but Riker doesn't have an ability to deploy into play. You can usually play Riker from hand, do his play operation, and then discard him at end of turn, but you can't use his blue operations when you do that. But you can keep 1 person card on the time by promoting them to duty officer. Usually your starting ship card has an operation for this, like the Enterprise has an activation to promote a person from your hand to duty officer. So we could exhaust the Enterprise, and that places Riker on the table. This doesn't let you use Riker's play operation because you didn't play Riker that way, you promoted him, but as long as he's on the table, then you can use his activation operations. Just remember that you only get 1 duty officer at a time. Some cards also have green operations. Riker has a resupply operation. The first step of your turn is the resupply step, so if Riker's on the table, then you get to do this thing at the start of each of your turns. Some cards also have cleanup operations, which happen at the end of your turn. Like, you can play this pacifist ally card from your hand to gain 3 dilithium crystals. Before you discard it at end of turn, it checks to see if you have any attack type cards in play. Then you log the card if you do, which removes it from your deck. One of the confusing things that I'll explain later is that when you play a card from your hand, it goes to an area where you can't use its blue operations, but the card is still, quote, in play until the end of your turn. And some operations care about the number of cards that you have in play. I'll need to come back and explain that more later. For now, in summary, you have play operations that let you play a card from hand and control operations that resolve when you gain control of the location. You have blue operations that you can only use if a card is sort of permanently on the table in front of you. Deployed ships, your duty officer, and so on. You need to exhaust a card to use its activations or reactions. Some operations cost an action, and you get 3 action tokens per turn. If you look at this blurry picture of Captain Shran, you can see that his activation operation down here has an action icon in front of it. So you have to spend a token to play that operation. Most of what you do on your turn is play cards and use blue operations. The other operations mostly just do what they say. A few cards have a blue passive operation, which is just always in effect even if the card is exhausted. Like the Deep Space Nine ship card has a passive that says this ship can't be warped. And then green operations resolve at the start or end of your turn, and red operations score points at the end of the game. So, you've seen how you use cards, but this is a deck building game. Where do those cards come from? For the next lesson, let's see how to get more cards. New cards may have better operations or score victory points. In summary, you can gain new cards from the market, you enlist a card from your reserve each time you shuffle your deck, and you can take control of locations by sending your ships and away teams there. The simplest way to get cards is from the market. There's 4 decks of cards in the market, with 1 face-up card for each deck. Your starting cards include cards that can gain other cards. Like the Captain Shran deck starts with this Confiscate card. It has an operation that says, spend 1 of your action tokens, play this card from hand, spend 2 dilithium crystals, and gain a cargo card. Gain a card means that you take the face-up card of that deck, or draw a random card off the top of the deck, and you either place that card on top of your own deck, so it's the next card that you draw, or you place the card in your discard pile. The Captain Picard deck starts with a Recruit card, which says, spend an action token, play this card, take an incident card, and gain an ally card. Take a card means put the card directly into your hand. This mostly happens when you take an incident card as a penalty for some other action. You also see some cards that say instead of gaining a cargo, you scan for a cargo. For example, this ally card says, scan 3 of cargo. That means you look at the top 3 cards of the cargo deck, and then you gain 1 of those cards or the face-up card. And any cards that you looked at from that deck that you didn't take go on the bottom of the deck. Other operations let you scan for a trait of a card. The traits are in the top right corner of the card. Like this ship card has an operation to scan for communication, doctor, engineer, or scientists. So first you choose which trait you want to scan for, like I want to scan for a doctor. Then you look through the face-up market cards. If any of those face-up cards are a doctor, then you gain 1 of those cards. Otherwise, you choose 1 of the 4 decks, and you flip up cards from the top of the deck until you find a doctor. If you can't find a doctor in the entire deck, then pick a different deck. Whichever way you scan, you gain a card to the top of your deck or to your discard pile. Any cards from a deck that you looked at and you didn't keep, you place those on the bottom of the deck. And anytime someone takes 1 of the face-up cards, then you immediately replace it with another card from the deck. The other cards that you gain to your deck mostly come from your reserve and development cards. You start the game with a stack of these cards beside your crew board. These cards are specific to your captain, and you can gain 1 of these cards each time you refill your deck. So, at the end of your turn, you draw a new hand of cards from your deck. If your deck is empty and you need to draw a card or look at the top card of your deck or anything that touches your top card, then you immediately shuffle your discard pile face down to remake your deck. Then you must enlist a reserve card to the top of your deck. Enlist means place the card on top of your deck. So it's the end of your turn. You're going to draw 5 cards. Your deck has 3 cards left in it, so you draw those 3 cards. You then shuffle your discards to remake your deck. You enlist the top reserve card to the top of your deck, and then you draw 2 more cards to go back up to 5 cards. If you shuffle your discard pile and there's no reserve cards left, then instead you can enlist one of your development cards. You can enlist any card in the stack. That's why these cards are face up. You need to pay the card's development cost, like Lieutenant LaForge here says his cost is 2 dilithium crystals, and then that card goes on top of your deck. Development cards tend to have strong operations or lots of victory points. Enlisting the right development cards is one of the most important goals of the game. The last cards to gain are neutral locations. At the start of the game, there's a neutral zone of 3 face-up location cards between the 2 players. The interesting thing about locations is that they usually don't go into your deck. When you gain control of a location, you resolve its control operation, and then you place the location on the table in front of you. Most locations just stay in front of you for the rest of the game. You gain control of a location by placing your tokens on it, either your ship tokens or your away team tokens. Your captain starts the game with a number of away team tokens on it, and some operations let you send an away token or away team token to a location. Like the Riker card has a big operation that says, spend a location, play the card from hand, do some things that include spend a crystal to send an away team to a location. Your ships in play also come with a matching token, and most ships have an operation that lets you warp the ship to a location. Warp means you move the ship's token to a location. You don't need to send ships to a location to send away teams there. Like, if a planet is empty, then the away teams can just take a basic shuttle down to the planet. But if an opponent has more ships on a location than you do, then they block your away teams from the location. So the opponent has a ship on this location and you don't, so you can't send away teams here. If you warp a ship here, then you have the same number of ships, and now you can send away teams down to the planet. If you have at least 3 total tokens on the location, including away teams and ships, and you have at least 2 more tokens than your opponent there, then you've secured the location. Then at the start of your next turn, well, at the start of any turn, you can gain control of 1 secured location. So you can't just take a location once you get a bunch of tokens there. You need to give your opponent a turn to try and stop you. And if you still have the location secured at the start of your next turn, then it's all yours. So the start of your turn, you check for a location where you have at least 3 tokens and at least 2 more than an opponent. When this happens, your opponent gains 1 glory for each token they have on that location. So the opponent here gets 2 glory for having 2 tokens here to fight you. All tokens on the location go back where they came from. The away teams go back to your captain. The ships are dismissed, which means you discard the ship cards entirely back to your discard pile. And the ship tokens go away. So once you use a ship to capture a location or fight for it, then it goes back in your deck. You need to deploy it again to get it back out. But then you put the location in front of you, you resolve its control operation, and you will draw a new location card to the neutral zone. So those are the ways that you can get cards. You can pause the video here if you want to review any of that. You gain or scan market cards to the top of your deck or your discard pile. You enlist reserve cards to the top of your deck when you shuffle your discard pile. And you can gain control of a secured location at the start of your turn. There's 2 other decks on the table, the Incidents and the Encounters. Incidents are usually a penalty for something. Encounters are scientific breakthroughs or other interesting things that happen, and you get those cards from special operations. Taking one of these cards puts it directly into your hand. There's also a lot of edge cases and small specific rules for getting cards. There's a glossary of keywords in the rulebook on page 29 with all of the specific interactions. I recommend you look up the exact rules for an operation the first time that you resolve it. Now, I've mentioned gaining certain tokens and spending them as a cost to play other cards. For the next lesson, let's look at some resources and other rewards that you gain from your cards. First, there's 3 resource tokens: yellow Latinum, pink Dilithium, and blue Glory. When you gain Latinum or Dilithium, you take that many tokens from the supply. When you spend these tokens, they go back to the supply. Glory is a more special resource. Each glory is worth a victory point at end of game. You can also spend a glory in place of 1 Latinum or 2 Dilithium. When you spend glory tokens, they go to the supply. When you gain glory, you take it from the Stardate card. At the start of the game, you stack the Stardate cards in number order. The top card says it starts with 5 glory tokens stacked on top of it. Each time you gain glory, you take some of these tokens. When the Stardate card is empty, then you give this card to your opponent, and then you fill the next Stardate card with glory tokens from the supply. The card says at the beginning of the next player's cleanup step, do a thing. So at the end of your opponent's next turn, they resolve this card. I'll explain that in lesson 4 when I explain the exact steps of the turn. Just remember that when you take all of the glory tokens off of the last Stardate card, that's usually how you trigger the end of the game. Next, let's look at the specialty tracks. There's 3 tracks on your crew board for research, influence, and military. Some cards say, gain this icon. That means move the cube on this track that many spaces forward. This Klingon card says that you can you can spend an action token, play the card from hand, spend 2 dilithium, and gain 1 military. That means you move your red cube 1 space forward. Specialties don't do anything on their own, but a lot of operations require a certain level of a specialty. Like this card right here. This says you can't play this card unless you have 4 influence, so you can't play this card unless your yellow cube is at least on the number 4 space. Also, some of your cards have a specialty skill tag on the corner, like this Risa location has a yellow influence tag. The Enterprise has a wild card specialty tag. There's a card called Utilize in your starting deck. One of its operations says, choose a specialty and gain 1 point of it for each matching tag you have in play. So you could play Utilize, choose Influence, and gain 2 influence bumps from both of these cards in play. While I'm looking at both of these cards, we can talk about the beaming activation. Risa has an activation operation to beam a person here. So you exhaust the location, you take a person card from your hand, and you tuck it under Risa so you can only see the top half of the card. The Enterprise says, exhaust the ship, discard a card from hand, and tuck any other card from your hand under the ship by beaming it there. There's 3 reasons to beam a card somewhere. Reason 1, it puts the card into play. Like if an operation says gain 1 dilithium crystal for each cargo you have in play, it's probably looking for cargo cards that were beamed onto other cards in play. But notice that you tuck the card so you can't see its operations. Beaming a card puts its suit and its traits into play, but you can't use any of their operations. Reason number 2, to beam a card down, it gets the card out of your deck. If you want to keep this ally card for its victory points, but you don't want to keep drawing the card into your hand, then you can beam it to the ship and get it out of your deck for later. And reason 3, a lot of mission cards care about beamed cards, or missions on your crew board. They also care about specialties a lot. Like, if you're playing Captain Picard with his basic crew board, then he has this mission on his board. It says, have 3 allies beamed onto the same ship and have at least 2 of your specialty tracks at space 4 or more. If you meet the goals on a mission, then you can complete the mission at any time on your turn. You resolve the reward and you gain everything here. And then you place a mission token over the mission so that you can't complete that mission again. And now let's talk victory points. At endgame, you score the victory points on all of the cards that you own. This includes cards in your deck and discard pile, cards in play, and cards in your log. Log means you tuck the card under your captain. That card isn't in play, it doesn't count for anything, but you still scored points at the end of the game. Usually you see that on cards that are only meant to be played once. They'll say something like, play this card, do this thing, and then log this card. Some cards score focus points, especially your big development cards. They have a specialty icon and a question mark, like LaForge has a blue research icon and question mark points. If we look at the Picard crew board, if you have 0 or 1 points of blue research, then all of your blue focus cards are worth 1 victory point at end of game. If you have at least 2 points of research, then all of your blue focus cards are worth 2 points at end of game. If you have 15 points of research, then all of your blue focus cards score 6 points at end of game. But if you haven't completed any missions on your crew board, then you score 0 points for all focus cards. So one way to score a lot of points at end of game is to get a lot of a single type of specialty and then gain multiple focus cards that match that specialty. But if you go that path, then make sure that you complete your mission. So those are most of the important rewards and effects. I've put a few other interesting things about rewards and card traits on screen. You can pause the video to read if you like. Especially look out for cards with ongoing traits, which aren't ships, but you can deploy them permanently into play, or look for cards with wild card traits, which can count as any other trait. Again, there's a lot more small stuff. You can find the keywords glossary in the rulebook. The first time that you see a new keyword, I recommend looking it up in the glossary. So, I've now shown you most of what happens in a turn. The main thing I haven't explained is the last step, the cleanup step. The next lesson, let's go over the exact 4 steps of your player turn. These steps are all printed on your crew board, so you don't need to completely memorize this. Step 1 is the resupply step. The only thing here is resolve the resupply operations on all of your cards in play. Step 2 is the control step. You can take control of 1 neutral location. You must have at least 3 tokens there and 2 more tokens than the opponent there. The opponent gains 1 glory for each token that they have there. Away teams return home. Your ship cards are discarded and you resolve the control operation on the card. Step 3 is the action step. This is when you use play and activation operations. You have 3 action tokens to spend each turn. Remember that when you use a blue activation or reaction operation, you exhaust the card and you can't use that card again this turn. I haven't said exactly what happens when you play a card from hand. You resolve one of its play operations, then you place the card on the table in your staging area. Cards in the staging area are in play. Anything that checks cards in play can check these cards. The main difference is staged cards can't use blue operations. And because these cards aren't in your discard pile yet, you can't shuffle them back into your deck yet. So if I play Riker here, I resolve his play operation, and then he goes to the staging area. So right now, Riker is still in play. If I'm looking for a card with a Starfleet trait in play, or if I'm looking for a person card in play, then Riker still counts for that, but I can't use Riker's blue operations, and then I'll discard Riker in the next step. So the last step of the turn is the cleanup step, which has a few things I haven't explained yet. There's 6 sub-steps of this step. First, if you have any cleanup operations on cards in play, then you resolve those now, even on cards in your staging area. Step 2 is Stardate Resolution. When you gain glory tokens, you take them off the Stardate card. When that card is empty, you give that card to your opponent. If you've got any Stardate cards that your opponent gave you last turn, then you resolve all the effects on the card now. The most common effect is to wipe the market. This means you remove the 4 face-up cards in the market and put them into the junk pile beside the market, and you flip up a new card for each deck. You also junk and replace locations in the neutral zone if they have no tokens on them. So if you've started placing away teams or ships on a location, it stays in play. The other locations get junked and replaced with new cards from the deck. Substep 3 is glory placement. You take a glory token off the Stardate card and place it on one of the face-up market cards. If anyone gains that market card in the future, they also gain these glory tokens. Substep 4 is discarding, and substep 5 is draw to your hand size. You first discard all cards in the staging area, and then you may discard any number of cards in your hand. Then you draw cards until you're back up to your hand limit of 5 cards. Remember that you need to empty your deck and shuffle your discard pile to get reserve cards into your deck, so you may want to discard your unplayed cards so you keep moving through your deck. The last substep is refresh. All of your exhausted cards in play get turned back up. Also, you go back up to 3 action tokens. You can't save up your unused actions for your next turn. You get exactly 3 tokens each turn. And after that, the next player starts the resupply phase of their next turn, and you keep going. And again, there's plenty of edge cases in the rulebook. Check the keyword glossary for specifics. It's the final lesson. So, when you take glory tokens, you take them from the top Stardate card. When the final Stardate card has no tokens, then you've triggered the resolution. You play until the end of the second player's turn, and then both players take one more turn. You can still get glory tokens at this point, you just take them from the supply instead. And then you score your victory points. You score 1 VP for each glory token. You score 1 VP for each away team or ship token that's still on a neutral location. If you're playing the advanced side of your crew board, then your missions may have victory points. Score the points on your completed missions. And then all the rest of your points are on your cards. You score the VP on every card that you own, whether it's in play, in your deck or discard, or logged under your captain. Any card with a question mark for points, those cards score nothing if you haven't completed any missions. Otherwise, each card scores the X bubble on the matching track on your crew board. If a card has a red endgame operation, you only check that operation if the card is in play. And that's it. The player with the most victory points gets the highest score in class and wins the game. Did you remember that this was all an Academy simulation? But there's another way to end the game. If the incident deck is ever empty, then the game ends immediately, even if you've triggered the resolution already. And then the player who owns the fewest incident cards wins the game. If you're tied for fewest incidents, then you count victory points to see who wins. You might think if there's only one card left in the incident deck, then just don't play any cards that make you take an incident, but watch out for attack cards that force your opponent to take incident cards. You might win the game by burning them out. And that is Star Trek Captain's Chair. If you can't decide where to start by looking at the missions on your crew board to see if you need specific cards or specialties. If you can promote a person card into play as your duty officer, that might give you more resources each round, and locations in the neutral zone may have resupply or activation operations to give you more stuff each round as well. You might want to start sending away teams or ships to a good-looking location. Thank you for watching this How to Play video from Board Game Textbook. Y'all take care.